The most classic form of fly fishing. We've all seen it. It's a lot of our first exposure to fly fishing, are fishing with dry flies. There's a lot of people out there who think that fly fishing is just fishing with dry flies, flies that sit on top of the water. Hi, Dave from Jesse Brown's here, and I'm going to give you a beginner's guide to dry flies, how to use them, and show you a few different kinds. So, when we're dry fly fishing, we're fishing with flies that look like insects that fly around. So we've talked about nymphing before. Nymphing, we're fishing with flies that look like the larval form of these insects. The stoneflies, mayflies, caddisflies, midges, anything that lays its eggs in the water as it matures aquatically and then becomes terrestrial in order to breed. Dry fly fishing is the hallmark of fly fishing. Like I said, everyone's seen it. So, what do some of these insects look like? Well, this is an elk-hair caddis, right? I showed you a caddis pupa on one episode. This is the adult form, right? This is supposed to look like a caddisfly, an adult caddisfly, right? We know our mayflies. This is one of my favorite mayfly patterns. This is a parachute Adams. It looks like a lot of different forms of mayfly, so it's a really good fly to have around. And I'll show you in a minute that we want to have some different sizes of these. So dry flies, they're gonna be super light. So we're really using the weight of that line to cast them out onto the water. We want to get a nice presentation. We don't want the line to slap the water. We want that fly to just rest down on the water and then drift on through. You'll see when you're out on the water these insects hatching. You'll see swarms of insects, or just a time of the day where these insects will just be flying around, landing on the water, and you're going to know when it's time to use dry flies. Trust me, you'll know. You'll see trout sipping bugs off the surface, you'll see splashing, you'll see a lot of insects around, and you'll know. It'll become very apparent. One thing I've had people say is, when do I know when to use dry flies? Trust your gut. You'll see it happening. Don't you worry. Some of the other dry flies we can use, if you can't really decide what kind of insect is flying around in the air that you're seeing, if you can't really identify it, if there's a lot of different kinds of insects flying around. Here in southern Appalachia, we're pretty blessed with having a lot of different insects hatching at once. So flies I like to use are some attractor patterns as well. Attractor patterns are flies that are just going to attract the fish to the surface to eat it. They don't necessarily, this is a royal wolf, and it doesn't necessarily look like any fly that you're going to see. It's not natural looking, but it looks fishy, and something wants to eat it. Another attractor pattern that's very popular around here is called a stimulator, right? Just looks like a flying insect, just looks like a bug. So our dry flies are obviously supposed to float on top of the water. They will get wet, right? After casting with it for so long, they are going to get a little waterlogged and they're going to start to sink. So some things you can do to prevent that: always have some floating on you when you're dry fly fishing. Floating comes in a lot of different types. So you got the powder, right? You can sprinkle that on there, rub it into the hackle. And then you have gel. You can rub that in there. And that's going to help shed water off of that fly so it stays dry. When the fly gets a little waterlogged, you can also do a few false casts just to dry it off. Some flies are going to be really, really small. When midges hatch, I mean, they're tiny. It's going to be really hard to see. Really small mayflies, it's really hard to see. So sometimes what you can do, if you're having that problem, is put a little piece of yarn about 1.5 feet above your dry fly and use it like a strike indicator. The other thing you can do is, if you're fishing with a really small fly, after you cast it out, get a feel for how fast the river is moving, so you can think about where your fly might be after you've casted it. If you see anything hit the surface, any trout, anything hit the surface, make some commotion, go ahead and set the hook, because it could be coming after your fly. Don't be afraid to use the small dry flies. There's always a remedy to being able to use them. I know my eyesight can be rough on some of those small flies, so I put a little piece of yarn above it, and guess what? It works great. So dry flies, once again, I'm going to say, dry flies float. What else floats? A strike indicator. So why not use a dry fly as a strike indicator and do what's called a dry dropper, right? So I got my stimulator here, and then below it, I got a soft tackle, all right? So this is going to be kind of a subsurface fly. You can also use some beadhead nymphs. The important thing is just not to use a nymph that's going to weigh down your dry fly and sink it. But this is great setup here because right behind your dry fly, now you've got something sitting right below it subsurface, and that can be just a dirty, washed out insect, and trust me, that's what trout are feeding on. Dirty, nasty bugs that got caught up in the current. So this is an incredibly effective method of dry fly fishing. I would say every time I dry fly fish, I'm always fishing a dry dropper because I want to increase my chances. We all want to catch fish. That's the whole point, right? Now, there's a lot of different insects, a lot of different kinds of stoneflies, mayflies, and caddisflies. You may not know exactly what kind you're looking at, but something you will definitely be able to know is the size of that insect. If you can do a basic identification of, oh, those are caddisflies, or oh, those are mayflies or midges, you've done half the work. What you can do is carry a variety of sizes of different kinds of patterns, and every pattern in here, so this is the parachute Adams on top, that looks like a lot of different kinds of mayflies. So just carry them in a variety of different sizes, match the size of the hatch, and you can still catch fish. And then I have, the elk hair caddis on the bottom here. Blue wing olives are a great early season mayfly to have with you. Just carry them in a few different sizes. Don't get too wrapped up in exactly what kind of mayfly or stonefly or caddisfly it is. Try to match the size of the hatch when you are in doubt. Fish will most likely hit it if you're matching the size of it. So, when we're out there dry fly fishing, just remember, we want to get that nice presentation, like I said. So, take your time casting. It's not about power. It's not about speed. Casting is all about timing. Take your time. Get that good presentation. You will know when to use dry flies. If you're using dry flies all day and not catching anything, it might be time to switch over to nymphs. If you see a bunch of fish hitting the surface, go ahead and throw that dry fly. It is the classic form of fly fishing that we all know and love. They come in a lot of different patterns. It can be kind of daunting sometimes to study different kinds of insects in the hatches, but go ahead, crack open a book, use the internet, come to Jesse Brown's and ask us about it, and we'll get you set up. Have fun dry fly fishing. It's always a blast watching fish come up and smash that fly. Enjoy yourself, be safe, have fun on the water.